Good evening, everyone. This is Dodie Onis. I'm from Denver Public Library. I'm an adult services librarian there, and I am thrilled to be here this evening to present four fabulous women discussing the history of women in alcohol. This is part of our Women's History Month. We're getting close to the end of it, but we still have a few more events we'll tell you about later. From the earliest days of civilization, alcohol has been at the center of social rituals and cultures worldwide. But when exactly did drinking become a gendered act? And why have bars long been considered places for men when without women, they wouldn't even exist? Tonight, we're going to have Mallory O'Meara, author of Girly Drinks, A World History of Women in Alcohol. And she'll be helping with this panel of examination of women in alcohol in the Denver area, featuring Chantel Columna, co-founder and general manager of Novel Strand Brewing in Denver, Nicki McTague, president of Infinite Monkey Theorem, a Denver-based winery, and Don Richardson, CEO of Rising Sun Distillery. If you want to purchase Girly Drinks, you can order that directly from Book Bar in Denver. We'll throw a link in the chat for that. Or you can check it out from Denver Public Library. I apologize for the noise in my background. I'm on vacation actually, and the place that I'm staying is at the end of a runway. So that noise is 6 passenger planes taking off behind me. All right, can we get a spotlight on Mallory? Few quick bios. Mallory O'Meara is an award-winning and best-selling author and historian. She lives with her 2 cats in the mountains near Los Angeles, where she is at work on her next nonfiction book for young readers. It is not about liquor. It is called Girls Make Movies, and it's due out in 2023. When she's drinking, bourbon is her drink of choice. Next up is one of our panelists, Chantel Columna. She is the co-founder and general manager of Novel Strand Brewing in Denver. She was raised in the Dominican Republic, and she's actually there now. She moved to New York with her family as a teenager, graduated from RPI in Troy, New York, with a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. She came to Denver in 2015 with her husband in search of sunshine and nature, and decided to jump into the craft brewing business. Chantel's goal is to create a welcoming space for a diverse community where people can gather, enjoy good beer, and create camaraderie in the community. And I have sat at the bar at Novel Strand, and she has succeeded in all those ways. When she's down at the tap room or in front of a computer, she's hiking with her 3 dogs, Sambusak, Shoku, and Ninkasi, and we'll hear a little bit more about Ninkasi later. And her husband, she takes him along with hikes as well, and they explore Colorado. Nikki has been in the wine industry for 18 years, and that is a whole lot of bottles of wine. Today, she is the president of the Infinite Monkey Theorem, an urban winery making mountain-grown and city-made varietals in a majority woman-owned and operated business with an 80% female staff. Hear, hear, Nikki. McTague's career began in the state of Washington working for, I might mess this up. I should have asked you how to say this. Garagiste?
You're
okay. All right, close. And during that time, lived in France and Italy for a year, where she furthered her understanding of the winemaking history and the culture of the regional practices. In 2013, thank goodness, she came to Denver and the Infinite Monkey Theorem to strengthen their knowledge of winemaking at the domestic level. And now, as the president, she oversees the company's national sales team, manages relationships with distributors, which has been a joy, I'm sure, the last 2 years, and follows and manages all the tax and license issues for the 25 states. I bet you that's also a joy. And runs the operations of her tap rooms in Denver and Austin. And last up, Donna Richardson. She comes from a long line of trailblazing women. Her grandmother flew airplanes in World War II. Her aunt was a biochemical warfare expert for the Department of Defense. And her mother was the first woman to drive bulldozers in the state of Utah. This makes this family officially ass kickers, women ass kickers here. As the managing owner of Rising Sun Distillery, Dawn has paved her way into the very male world of craft beverages. Over the past 7 years, she has built a statewide tourism project with the Distillers Guild, created award-winning spirits, and built a beautiful tasting room in Frisco, Colorado, and has put up with more than her fair share of mansplaining by people who assume they know more about our industry, her industry, than we do. Don's motto is life is too short not to drink well. All right, we also, before we jump into the panel, we're going to give a plug. We have put together a great reading list for anyone interested in learning more about the history of women in alcohol. My co-pilot Jen is going to throw that into the chat. We encourage you to check out those books. All right, we're going to start on the panel with Mallory giving us a little bit of background on why she took this deep dive into women in the history of alcohol and just some of the astonishing things she found out. If anybody that's attending has read the book, I told Mallory when we had our little tech check a week or so ago, that what I love about this book is I feel like she's sitting right next to me, telling me the story and sort of elbowing me, like saying, pay attention, this is an important part right here. So with that, I'm gonna let Mallory tell us a little bit about what precipitated Girly Drinks.
So I'm a huge nerd, and whenever I get into anything, I want to read about it. I very much subscribe to the Hermione Granger School of Life. As soon as I get into anything, I go straight to the library, and that's exactly what happened with cocktails. I had moved out to Los Angeles 6 years ago, and as a housewarming present, my best friend got me a cocktail kit, you know, bar spoon, shaker, the works, and a recipe book. And I started making cocktails and getting really into it. And then of course I started buying books on cocktail history, and immediately I was getting frustrated because none of the books included any women's history. And I know women, I am a woman. It just seemed like a glaring omission to me. And so I just bought more and kept reading more and more. And finally I read one single book that I read that was about the history of the cocktail in America. And there was one line that said during Prohibition was the first time women were welcomed into public drinking spaces, because they were all speakeasies. And, you know, if they were illegal anyway, like, let's welcome the women in. And I was like, hold the phone, please. That's what I want to know about. And that was it, one line. And I was complaining to said best friend, which I often do. I was like, wow, there are just no books on women drinking, are there? And she said, yeah, there aren't. There's not a single book about the history of women drinking. I said, oh, that's a bummer. And she said, and I was working on my first book at the time. And she said, well, I know what your next book's going to be. And that turned into Girly Drinks. I was very excited to find out that the editor I have for that I work with, I've been working with for a long time now, Peter Joseph at Hanover Square Press, used to be a cocktail writer and is also still a huge cocktail nerd. And when I had finished Lady from the Black Lagoon, we were having coffee and figuring out what I wanted to do next. And I was like, man, I really would love to write the history of women drinking. And he said, I would love you to write that. So off we were for Girly Drinks. Dodie, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to keep the plane noise down. So that's really cool because librarians are nerds. And I think our panelists are also nerds because you can't jump into this business lightly. You have to be ready to do your research and do your homework. Now, each of you, let's start with Chantel. What inspired you to get into the beer business?
So my first introduction to the world of craft beer was back in college. We had this bar in downtown Troy, New York, called The Rock, where actually, while it was like divey bar, it really had some of the best beer selection in the region. And it was a hidden gem, if you will, in the sense that not all the college kids, or like not everyone really went out there necessarily. That's actually where I met my husband, and our business partner introduced us. That's kind of where my beer journey started, and started really diving into just more styles, understanding that there's so much more flavor than your typical like macro beers and like what, you know, most folks are used to drinking college parties. So it opened a whole new world of, you know, what kind of different styles and flavors were out there. Once, you know, fast forward 6 years later, as we live in New York City, my husband and I decided that we wanted to make our move out to Denver, primarily because of the craft beer scene that was already there. We had visited 2 years prior and really enjoyed the community that was around that. Just how a lot of it, like the nature and just the community aspect, camaraderie between people really developed, and like seemed like Denver really had a thriving scene around that. So we wanted to expose ourselves to that, and we decided to pack up our bags and move, from New York out to Denver to get immersed in the scene and figure out a plan of how do we start this. And we opened Novel Strand 4 years ago, July of 2018, in the Baker neighborhood of Denver.
All right, how about we go on to Nikki? What inspired you to jump in a wine bucket?
So I feel like I kind of stumbled into the wine industry. After I graduated college, I moved to Seattle, Washington. And, I think at 22 years old, you think like, I'm going to move to this big city. I'm going to take it on. I'm going to conquer the world. Lo and behold, I learned that that's not always how it works out. And I ended up working for a cousin of mine who was in the wine industry at the time, the company that Dodie introduced earlier, Garagiste Wine. And their whole business model at the start was introducing people to wines that weren't necessarily scored or weren't wines that you would necessarily read about. But it was encouraging people to drink wine that spoke to them. So it might not have a 90-point score with it, but it's something that you like and that you want to introduce to your friends. And it kind of becomes full circle that the wine industry is really about enjoying it with a community and being with other people. And so that's always been my philosophy with wine, partly because that's how I started into it. But as being a native of Colorado, I wanted to come back to the great state of Colorado where we had sunshine and not the 320 days of rain that we had up in Seattle. And so I approached Infinite Monkey Theorem at the time. And it was a huge shift from selling European wines that weren't necessarily scored, but now selling Colorado wine, an industry that I was completely unfamiliar with. But like Chantel, my whole goal was to be involved in the community, and I love Denver and what Denver was doing in 2012. It was completely evolving, specifically the Rhino neighborhood where we are now. And that was what I wanted to be part of. I wanted to introduce people to what we were doing and what I felt passionate about, but also educate people that there's really great product coming out of the state of Colorado, that we can support the agriculture, the people, and bring that to everyone as a community. So that's kind of what full circle brought me here to the state of Colorado, and still enjoying the product that I feel so passionate about.
And you're wearing your pride right behind you there on the wall. You have the Colorado flag.
Absolutely.
There's an amazing number of bars that have 303 in their name here in Belize. So like people carry their Colorado pride like wherever they go. Dawn, how did Rising Sun happen?
Well, I don't know how it started. I mean, I do know how it started, but it's sometimes hard to think about. I think I've always enjoyed a good drink. I'm from Utah, but I'm non-Mormon. And so I think it was always a way to sort of show a little bit of rebellion. And then as I got older, I went to college in Southern Colorado and kind of got introduced to craft beer. And then, I traveled a bit and spent some time, visiting wineries in other parts of the world and parts of the US. And so at some point, my husband really wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was a history teacher for 15 years, and he really wanted to start a business. And we looked at lots of different things, and they just didn't really make sense. And then one day I said, well, what if we make the booze? Which I probably should have never said, because it's been a really hard business, to be honest. But then we kind of went down that rabbit hole. And then after about a year in, he went back to his day job and I stayed running our business. And I think, like Nikki said, getting involved with the agricultural community and knowing who our farmers are, going to their farms, sourcing our products, developing new products is really the part of the business that I really love. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time with our tasting room these days and not as much time being able to really explore new products, which is what I'd love to do more of. And so that's where we're at.
Well, it seems like everybody seems to enjoy the social aspect of what being involved in the spirits and the craft brewing industry brings as well. Mallory, one of the things that I'm going to use this all the time now is I'm not drinking for the buzz, I'm drinking for the calories. I loved learning about in your book how watered down beer was an important source of food. And, you know, we've all heard people say, you know, beer is liquid bread. So when you were getting into the weeds there and like beer as nutrition, were you surprised as well? Or, you know, what was the most fun thing that you discovered about that?
I mean, I was sort of surprised, but it was really important for me to hammer that point home in the book because, you know, nowadays in our modern world, we think of alcohol very often as like an indulgence. It's a luxury. It's something that you enjoy on the weekends after work. And that's a very, very recent development in human history up until very recently. And honestly, there's still cultures around the world that get a lot of their daily calories from beer. So it's so essential to be able to understand that when you're reading about alcohol history, because, you know, we hear, you know, oh, people in medieval times drank beer all the time. They must have been drunk. It's like, no, they're just trying not to die, you know, and trying not to get dysentery. So it was very cool thinking about that. And it's such an important adjustment to make when you're reading this stuff, because, you know, alcohol and beer and all types of fermented drinks are so ubiquitous in any civilization. Doesn't matter what part of the world you are, doesn't matter what time period. It was really cool to see how many different cultures sort of incorporated alcohol, you know, into their culture, into their diets. How my favorite part about reading about it is, you know, finding out how every single culture has made their own alcohol with whatever is lying around, you know, whatever grain, whatever crop, whether that's wheat or rice or you know, yams, whatever it is. It's just really cool to see how alcohol and humans have really grown up together and how important alcohol is to the history of the human race.
I think that's something that, you know, when we give tours, I've always talked about because I'm a history nerd, right? Just that alcohol's been made everywhere by whatever grew nearby and, you know, whatever you could ferment to store grains and fruits so they wouldn't spoil for survival. And I've always found that really fascinating. And I loved the book, part of the book where you really talked about, you know, how this happened in the house or in homes and where women really took care of it because it was housework really, because you're standing over a kettle for hours and hours and hours. I mean, any of us in this business know that there's a lot of cooking and waiting and stirring and cooking and waiting and stirring. And I just thought that was quite fun. I think I knew a little bit about that, but reading your book was way more in depth than anything I had learned before.
Well, that's why it's so funny to me that women have been largely left out of alcohol written history, because what you think something that has happened in kitchens for thousands of years did not involve women. Like it's just I did a panel last year with Joy Spence, who is like this incredible, you know, distiller. She works at Appleton Rum, and she was telling me how early on in her career men would tell her to get back in the kitchen. And it's so funny because like that's where the booze is made, like that's where we all want to be, right? It's such a hilarious silly insult, and that's, you know, again, when I started working on this book, I just refused to believe that women were not involved.
I just like the picture every once in a while, like on like some crazy Facebook or Instagram or something like that, you'll hear about drunken elephants running amok in India, and I always was like, oh, how often does that happen? I'm like, well, clearly often, because it was the drunken monkeys that kind of tipped off the humans to like, maybe you should try what's in that bucket too. You'll be as happy as us. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And now next time somebody questions, like, do you really need that third beer? I'm going to be, yeah, I need the calories. I'm hungry. One of the other things that I thought was very timely in this was you discuss a little bit, Mallory, about orange wine, amber wine in Greece. And if you want to talk about that a little bit and then maybe throw it over to Nikki to see if Infinite Monkey Theorem is going to be messing around with that.
Yeah, it's always really cool when you see stuff that's like new and cool and buzzy in the world of alcohol, and you find out it's actually thousands and thousands of years old. It's sort of like a third category of wine somewhere. It's not rosé, it's somewhere in between white and red. But it's something that the Greeks drank. There's certain historical texts that mention green wine. There's because nowadays what they thought of wine back then was a bit different than what we think of it now. But in a lot of ways, it was very, very much the same. And it's really cool to kind of see people reconnecting with this type of drink that's, again, thousands of years old. Nikki, I'll let you jump in and talk about wine.
Yeah, so interesting. Infinite Monkey Theorem, we've always tried to push the boundaries and stay on top of things and bring, I think one thing kind of steering off is we've done canned wine, which I think people know us claim to fame, but canned wine's been around for several years, and producing wine in unconditional formats and non-traditional formats has been around forever, Mallory, as you could speak to. It hasn't always been traditionally in the glass, but we tried in 2012, we brought orange wine and tried to educate people on what orange wine was and the history behind it. And it was so hard here in the state of Colorado to bring that to people and to really excite people around it. And so unfortunately, we've kind of steered away from that. But I love the history aspect of it. And as Dawn has talked about, on our tours and what we bring people to, we talk about the whole history and the evolution of the winery and the wine industry as a whole. And orange wine is something that we've always talked about, but it's amazing to hear how many people are unfamiliar with it and don't understand where wine has started and where we've come to today. And people think, things like canned wine came up yesterday and Infinite Monkey was the first to do it, and it's fun to educate people that that's not the case. So it's really exciting, but the book brings up thousands of points like that. So
I think it's really funny now that a lot of the younger drinkers think that canned cocktails are fantastic. And I remember being like 10, 11, 12 years old. So that's like 50 years ago. And my parents discovering canned cocktails then and thinking that they were fantastic. And then I start thinking about what the cocktails were. And they're like Moscow mules and Manhattans. And it's like, wait 50 years, like bell bottoms, everything comes back in style, right? Yeah.
Well, funny, Mallory, reading your book, I had never, being in the wine industry, I had never heard of the term alcopop. And I was like, what is alcopop? And it's essentially, we're doing canned wine with higher alcohol levels, so it's a little bit different, but it was a new term for me to completely understand, and that was such a craze. And then you hear like it's gone out of, it's not like the in thing to do, but you see all the time now, what do we see? Like the wine slushies that are coming in popsicle form and, different drinks like that. So it's funny to see like exactly what you say, Dodie, that it's coming full circle.
Everything comes back. Everything. Yeah. I'm as horrified as I am to see early 2000s fashion come back. Everything's comes back, whether it's beer or fashion or music or whatever it is.
Yeah. And we're guilty of that too. In the wine industry, specifically at our tap room, we're serving frosé, which is like the drink right now, especially in the summertime, and it's essentially frozen rosé. And people sitting on a patio want to drink frosé all day long, and it's watered down rosé, so it's alcopop essentially.
I mean, like you said, so much of it is perception, and often when you're trying to market a new product or get people excited about something, it's just education. That's really what it comes down to. I think especially a lot of women have a perception that certain types of drinks are, and I know this because this is what it was like when I was in college. There was like certain things that like weren't girly drinks, and that's the only barrier I see to women not getting more involved in the industries, whether they be beer, spirits, wine, and not drinking more of these things. Because I've been around so many women, and I'm like, I'll be drinking bourbon, and they're like, wow, you're drinking bourbon straight, and I'm like, have a sip, and they're like, oh wow, this is amazing. I just would have never thought that. And it's all it takes is just like a little bit of education.
Yeah, I loved that in your book too when you brought that up, because I hate gendered drinking culture. It drives me crazy. I think maybe because I am a distiller and I make whiskey, And people come in all the time and they're like, oh, well, we need some girly drinks for these people. I'm like, well, here's some whiskey for
Yeah,
you.
straight
And,
whiskey
you
here
know,
in a beer.
and
Here's your girly drink.
and you know, it's perfectly acceptable for anybody to drink, you know, a pink, sweet, fluffy drink too, because they're appropriate when you're in the Dominican Republic or, you know, someplace like that. And so I think that is something that I loved about the book, that you kind of kept bringing back, and something that we talk about a lot. At one point, my whole staff was also women, although now they're all men. And, you know, it's something that we're always kind of pushing those boundaries, you know, and different kinds of drinks and flavors coming back and forth too. I always say that the distilling world is a little bit where beer was 20 years ago. So a lot of our job is to like push boundaries and educate the population and try new things, but some things don't work. You know, when we first opened, nobody would buy gin. And I think gin is fantastic, but now it's all the rage, I think, because in
Now it's
Europe,
cool
they're
again.
drinking gin tonics, and now it sells like great. But I would, you know, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, gendering a drink is the most hilarious thing in the entire world. It's like, you know, gendering a sock. It's just, or gendering types of bread. Like, oh no, that's the girl bread. But I often find that it means that nobody gets to drink what they want, you know, because then guys are forced to drink the strongest, bitterest thing that they can find, and women are forced to drink things that are fruity. And I often find that people want to, like, my boyfriend's dad loves an appletini, you know, and I love straight bourbon, and it just, gendering things just means that no one gets to do the things that they really want to do.
Yeah, it's funny here in Belize, there's only like 2 beers, Bellican and maybe Land Shark, but Bellican has a stout. And I like stouts. So I ordered a Bellican stout, and the guy selling it to me said, oh, you're going to drink like a native. And I'm like, oh, the tourists drink just the regular Bellican and the locals drink the Bellican stout. Well, put me down for 2 Bellican stouts. But it was funny because even this person that didn't even know me was like, oh, you're not drinking the light beer? You're having the dark one. So Chantel, in the beer business, do you get pressure for different flavors?
I'd say absolutely. It's really interesting, as we were talking about just generally like how trends happen and how certain things come back. One of the things that came to mind is how, you know, as we started the business, and still to this day, hazy IPAs are like all the craze. People love the fruity, hop forward beers. And for a lot of people, that's, you know, the younger drinkers, if you will, that's how they're getting into the world of beer. Whereas the more seasoned drinkers, if you will, are going back to lagers or just clean beers, the ones that you can just enjoy, you know, every day, if you will. So it's just really interesting to see the shift that's happening, as well as like there's still a little bit of that pressure of like, you know, again, hazy IPAs are all the craze. But talking to another item that I think Nikki, you brought up, and Mallory as well, as far as like education and like educating the consumer, that's a very big part of what we do at Novel Strand. Like, we don't do your typical quote unquote IPA. We call our hoppy beers unfiltered hoppy ales. And the reason why is because they're not necessarily restrict to a particular set style. We just choose the flavor that we really want to highlight, that hop that we want to highlight. And at the end of the day, because it is the hop that we're trying to highlight, we just the process in which it's made, that's why it's called unfiltered hoppy ale. And it's really interesting to just have that interaction with the folks across the bar, to then have that education, and they understand where we're coming from with it, and like really just enjoy the beer for what it is, and the flavor that you're trying to bring forward, not necessarily because it subscribes to a style or trend.
Yeah, I think with some of the, you know, early days of craft brewing, it was like how bizarre a beer you could make. So, you know, my son worked for a brewer in Denver for a little while, and like, you know, they made the traditional beer with spruce needles. I only needed one spruce needle beer. That's all I needed to experience, was that one spruce needle beer. And I appreciate the history in it and where it's coming from. but I'm not going to sit on my back porch and throw back, a number of Spruce needle beers. So some of the one of our attendees differs with me. They love the Spruce beer. So Mallory, thank you for straightening out the whole whiskey with an E, whiskey without an E thing for me. Did you learn how to say it in the Scottish and Irish ways?
I did. I had to read the audiobook. I will never write about the French ever again. My Boston accent is not compatible with French, but it was, I will say, the whiskey without an E and whiskey with an E was a nightmare during copy editing. I think I drove my copy editor into an early grave, but it's really important. I mean, people don't realize, like in Scotland, they don't call it Scotch, they just call it whiskey. So it's really, really important to be able to sort of have those delineations and know what kind of whiskey you're talking about. And a lot of people don't realize, how much whiskey is made in Japan and other parts of the world besides Ireland and Scotland. A lot of people don't even realize that bourbon is whiskey. Whiskey is such a huge category, and whiskeys can be really thick, really smoky, really peaty, really light, really fruity. I mean, there's so much going on in there. It's just like wine or beer. If you get it, I think a lot of us growing up are taught to, and by taught, I mean, you drink whatever like someone's older brother will buy for you. So you end up drinking something terrible and you think, all right, well, this is all what whiskeys are. And then you can get older and hopefully be introduced to different types of beer. Like when I was a kid, the first beer I ever had was a Natty Ice Light. And I was like, all beers are bad. I will never have another beer in my life. And then later on in life, I was convinced to try beer and I was like, oh my God, this is great. And so much, same with wine, same with everything. So again, I just think that I keep hammering this point home, but so much of it comes down to education and seeing how there's really room for everybody in this world and in all tastes.
Donna, you want to tell us a little bit about the kind of whiskeys you're making at Rising Sun?
We make a bourbon, a rye. We have a collaboration with Epic Brewing where we use 3 malts out of their Big Bad Baptist beer, which is an imperial stout. And then we add a little corn and we age it in the barrels that the Big Bad Baptist beer is aged in. So that whiskey's very malty, and it's one of those drinks that people either love or they're kind of confused by. So I think that's kind of fun to have. And then we also make chili whiskey. I'm from the Four Corners area, and so chilies are so so much a part of Colorado and the Southwest, and so we do a chili white whiskey, and recently we've thrown some of that in a rye whiskey barrel, so now we have a chili aged whiskey, and it's fun. It's fun to put stuff. We also make a peach brandy that we age in our bourbon barrels, and I just keep reusing those barrels as many ways as I can. And then we also sell them or give them to breweries to try to collaborate with. But whiskey is an umbrella term. And then there's, just thousands of different varietals and things underneath it. And I think especially for all 3 of us, we're all in sort of the micro world, and our worlds are so different than what you see on the shelf in terms of, large brands. And when people really start exploring that micro world, the nuances and the flavors and the terroir that you get is so different from place to place and bar to bar and or producer to producer. And I think it's really exciting and really, really fun,
I love the story, Mallory, about how the Maker's Mark red candle wax has become, I just pictured her sitting like in her garage, wherever, like dipping this one. I don't know, green's not doing it for me, just do the next one. And to me, Maker's Mark was one of the first like fancier bourbons I ever started to drink because people told me it was fancy. And there was something very satisfying about cracking that now plastic label off the top of it. So it's, and I haven't tried your rye, John, but I did try your special gin, and I drank it very slowly and coveted it because it was it gave me red cheeks. Let's just say that it was, it filled me full of the spirit. So, all right. I love the part again, and I'm not a history buff, but I just love like when you like sort of face people in this, like, oh, there's this guy, Jerry Thomas. He's so famous. He sold 4,000 recipe books. And there's this other lady, Isabella Beaton. She sold like 10,000 times more than him, and nobody gives her credit when they talk about cocktail recipes. So how did you discover the Isabella Beaton book, the recipe book?
Well, I got to give props to Dr. Nicola Nice, who is the founder of Pomp and Whimsy Liqueur. She's really one of the people who has talked a lot about Isabella Beaton and brought notice for her. But really, for me, I came across her when I was just sort of doing research into that time period, because something that's very important to me and very frustrating to me about a lot of cocktail historians in the world is that their view of what constitutes history is very, very narrow. Like, drinking history can only happen in public and only happen in bars, which means that, okay, we're only going to write about straight white guys for like the rest of eternity, because for the longest period of time, those were the only types of people that were allowed to drink in those public spaces, when in reality, everybody else was drinking at home in different places. So when you widen your search and see where else, because a lot of drinking history happens in the kitchen. You were just talking about Marge Samuels at Maker's Mark. You know, she really revolutionized the way that alcohol was marketed, and she did it by dragging her deep fryer, filling it full of wax from her kitchen and bringing it into her basement, you know. So having that very, very narrow view of only, you know, important things can only happen in bars is really, I mean, damaging at best, and terrible at worst. It leaves so many different people out of history. So I was really excited to be able to write about that, and I hope somebody writes more. I mean, obviously, Girly Drinks is very broad. I tried to make it.
Mallory, you just lost your sound. Oops. That might be me.
I can hear you, Dottie.
Okay, we lost Mallory there for a minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. Where did I leave off?
The deep fryer in the basement and waxing bottles.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, you know, so much history happens outside of those spaces, and by having such a narrow view and leaving them out of history, you're basically leaving everybody behind on purpose, and it's very annoying. It's annoying at best and absolutely awful at worst. And I really hope, I mean, Girly Drinks is obviously a really broad book, and I hope, and I wanted it to be that way because I tried to get as much history as I possibly could into one book. But I hope that somebody, maybe Dr. Nice, will write a book about that time period and those women, because they were also, you know, they had beer recipes, wine recipes, cocktail recipes, but they also had like, all right, how to burp a baby, how to roast a chicken, how to clean your mantle. People just completely discounted them, even though there were women writing alcohol recipe books almost 100 years before Jerry Thomas did, but no one cared because they were women doing lady things in the kitchen, you know. But that's where we've been saying, that's where all the important stuff happens.
Well, and as an added bonus for people that are attending today, 25 of you chosen at random are going to get a copy of a little excerpt from the Isabella Beaton recipe book. And it has really fun recipes in it, like flips and fizzes and shrubs and all kinds of drinks that we're seeing shrubs come back onto cocktail menus now. So it's pretty exciting.
I do want to say real quick, please look at the conversion page. Some people have been making cocktails out of that book, and I did a conversion page of all the historical measurement terms to today's terms. If you do not, you will be making a cocktail that might kill a horse.
So proceed at your own risk with the cocktail recipes. One thing I wanted to plug and talk to Mallory a little bit about as well, or ask her to talk about a little bit as well. Just about a week and a half ago, Denver Public Library did a discussion with the two directors, filmmaker and director of the Lesbian Bar Project documentary, which talked about, I think there's 13 or 14 lesbian bars still designated around the United States. And one of the things that was interesting about that documentary was it was as much about the cocktails as it was to provide a safe place for women to be together. Mallory, you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, it's something I write about a bit in the book. The Bar Project, the documentary a little bit, and Lesbian Bars quite a bit. Bars have been historically, and we're in the pandemic, so maybe not as much at the exact second, but will be in the future, extremely important to the queer community. And I was very frustrated to see that almost every single cocktail history book I ever read completely left out those gay and lesbian bar spaces, even though they're not just important to queer history, they're important to alcohol history in general. I mean, lesbian bars in the United States were really like the first bars in the United States that like were women owned and operated, and were like special spaces like made specifically for female customers. They were the very first all female bar awards happened at a lesbian bar. I think it was Long Island. There's a lot of really cool history there that's just sort of being ignored. And I was really excited to find out about the Lesbian Bar Project, because it's sort of a dual mission of both trying to save the bars that are still out there, because thanks to the advent of a lot of online dating apps and the changing ways that people identify as queer, now people are not so much looking for a lesbian bar as just like a queer friendly space. So specifically lesbian bars have been changing quite a bit. So they've been trying to save and highlight those, but also just talk about the history of the lesbian bar and how amazingly cool it is and really important it is to women's history, but to bar history in general.
Yeah, my co-pilot just posted the link for the Lesbian Bar Project video in the chat. So if any attendees are interested in looking at it, it's a free view. It's really interesting. It's very short. It's like maybe 25 minutes. But it really was a passion project for the two ladies that made it. Okay, so here's kind of an odd question, I think. Mallory, in one of the chapters, you talk about the rise of ladies' night and fern bars and bars that look like Cheers or feel like Cheers. Chantel and Donna and Nikki, I'm going to start with you, Chantel. What's the vibe you're going for in Novel Strand?
I'd put it as very unassuming, if you will. We are very much in the middle of the neighborhood. Our original inspiration was a Belgian cafe. So there's no TVs in our bar. There's original brick wall, open ceiling, as in the ceiling rafters, very natural, quiet, like low vibes. People say it's a very good date night spot. Apparently there's a lot of date nights in our bar, but it's just a neighborhood bar. It really is. And there's like moms or dads that come from like when they're picking up their kids, they stop by or whatever the case is. So it's very calm and very friendly and very unassuming.
How about you, Nikki? You've got a totally different space going.
Sure. So like Chantel, I think it's very much the same vibe. However, within the wine industry, we wanted to create something that was very unpretentious. We wanted to create something that was very inviting. So we have, lots of cozy couches. Full disclosure, I've done that entire tap room off thrift stores and Craigslist and anything else that you can think of. But I wanted to go kind of the anti-Napa feel. So I wanted to create a space where people can feel like they can come in and they can ask questions. If you've been to our space, our bartenders, they're very informal. They very much fit the Rhino neighborhood are very hipster. You can come in, you can ask a question. If you can't pronounce a varietal, that's okay. If you've never tasted wine, that's okay. And that's kind of the aesthetic that I've created in the winery, that I want it to be welcoming, and I don't want it to feel intimidating in any way to anyone walking in there.
And Don, you just created a tap room, tasting room just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, in August of 2020, we opened. I was painting walls literally when Vail Resorts shut everything down. So it was a bit of a shocker for us. I feel like I've always wanted to create a really nice space that women feel comfortable in. We used to have a pop-up bar in Rhino for about 6 months, and there were some women from a marketing company, and they had worked for a beer company, and they're like, all they ever want to do is shrink it and pink it to attract women. And I loved that term, and they were complimenting me because they felt like our branding and what we were doing was already really speaking to that without trying. And so our tasting room in Denver, or in Frisco, I wanted something really beautiful and somewhat elegant, but not pretentious. I wanted it to be fun and warm and cozy, but also like soft. We have velvet blue bar stools, and we have a little bit of Victorian furniture, and then some fake taxidermy to lighten the mood a little bit, and chandeliers. I just felt like so much of the alcohol world just feels like dude space, and I really wanted to create space that wasn't that. And even in our distillery in Denver, which is really mostly manufacturing, we painted it with bright colors and some fun lighting, just for the same reason, is to kind of just, make it welcoming to more people.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to when I have a chance to get up to Frisco, and maybe they just pushed the ski season back, so it's not going to end till the end of April. So I might be able to hit it the month of April. So Mallory, I snorted out loud on the plane when I read about. I had forgotten the chapter about Jill Voth, who's the brewer who helped create Michelob Ultra and I think a lime beer. And he said, everybody thinks that Beardy McFlannel is the guy that created those beers. I just thought that was so funny. Now, I don't know if I really should applaud the person for making Michelob Ultra. I know many jockish kind of young men like my son, they will drink 10 Michelob Ultras instead of 3 decent beers because they are worried about calories and carbs. How far down do, Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch must have, 40 different kinds of beers now. And, how the big brewers go kind of more for quantity, where small brewers like Novel Strand, all of your companies really, they're going for being good at fewer things than trying to be mediocre at a lot. Did you see that? I'm sorry, I muted myself too soon. Did you see that as across the board with the big brewing and spirits and wine businesses?
I don't know who's this question is.
Oh, for you, when you compared the big spirits and brewers and stuff, were they more interested in how many gallons they were getting out, or were they more excited about?
I think that might be more of a question for someone else on the page. I didn't really get into that part of research for the book.
Chantel, you want to jump in? Do you you were saying you're going to be bringing back some of your favorites. So your customers have to get used to drinking a beer for a while and then it not being around.
Yes, and that's also part because of the size of our system. We have a 5-barrel brew house, but our largest fermentation tank is a 10-barrel. So depending on the styles that we put out, some of those might run, might be over within 2 weeks, and they take at least a month to come back, and that we're on a rotating schedule. So we definitely focus on the small craft ales, and we do focus on our very specific styles. I'd say what people probably know more about us from is our hoppy ales, but we also do Brett fermented sours, We do lagers, and we even have this one particular style out there that it's a bit of a creation of our own. It's actually, I saw a question in the chat about if there's like a beer that one of our beers that surprises people the most in a good way, and I'd say that that's one of them. So it's a black ale of sorts, if you will. It's a combination between a Schwarzbier, Baltic Porter, Tamavi, Kolsch, kind of a little bit of everything. It's all German malt and hops, fermented cold, but dark in color. So people see the dark in color and think that the beer will be heavy or whatever the case might be. And the moment they taste it, it's so light and just flavorful. So they end up coming back for more. So that's just answering one of those questions, and just answering one of the questions on the chat. But in reality, yeah, we like to focus on our just like small line of recipes, if you will, as opposed to a plethora of things.
Yeah, you just brought up marketing a little bit, and there's a question that I want to throw out to Nikki. Is one of the things that Nikki has been doing in Infinite Monkey Theorem is rebranding from the famous monkey that we've all known to grow and love on the can to a slightly different look. You want to talk about that a little bit, Nikki?
So recently we had a shift in ownership. And so we are now 90% female owned and operated. And we felt like in the true evolution of monkeys and what we're doing, we wanted to really create a new brand out there, still stay true to who we are and what we're doing, but bring more awareness to who this new group is. So our cans are a little more, they're not as aggressive. So they're a wider can. They're not the dark monkey face on there, but there is now a predominant woman in the background with a monkey on her shoulder. And the reason that we did that is because myself and our sales team are all female, and we wanted to create a story around our branding, and we wanted to talk about the things we believe in and the things we're passionate about. And it's not just about go to the liquor store and find a label that's cool, because we've all been guilty of doing that when it comes to buying wine, but we want people to understand who we are and what we're doing and how we're giving back to the community. And we felt like rebranding this really gave more of a face and more of a story to who we are. I kind of go back to some of the branding that's out there with, and this, Mallory, obviously goes to your book, but there are some wine brands out there that target females only. And I always say we're not just a group of babes on a can, but we're more than that. We're educated, smart women out there who are giving back and want to speak about why we're in this industry and what we're doing and how we're kind of spearheading this non-traditional industry and how we're making a difference there. And so that's where this new brand came from. And those cans will start to hit the market the end of this month. And then you'll see it roll out through the summer, and then it'll be in the market fully by the end of the year.
I hope this summer we see everybody out hoisting cans of beer and wine and having fun, because we all deserve it. I have a couple more questions, but we've got some questions from in chat that I want to get to. And can we run over a couple of minutes, panel, if necessary? Yeah, just because we have some good questions in here. So one question is, what are your most popular beverages? And I think maybe what might surprise people about one of your most not popular beverages, or yeah, popular, but also maybe one of your favorites, personal favorites as well. Let's start with Donna.
I think that was that question was addressed to Chantel and earlier, but our whiskeys are delicious and they're popular, but I really love our farmers market line. I love making spirits out of chilies. We do a lavender hibiscus liqueur as well. And we do a peach brandy, and all of those are made with the lavenders from Palisade. Our peaches that we use are from Palisade, and our chilies are from Pueblo. And I think they're really unique, but they're not esoteric. And so they're really accessible.
Thank you. How about you, Nikki? Anything surprising from Infinite Monkey or that you'd like to drink?
Sure. So I think with Infinite Monkey specifically, our canned wine is what's most popular. And what I always tell people, I think people steer clear of drinking wine out of a can. But our whole goal with canned wine is putting really quality product into a can and being able to drink it in whatever form you want. So if you're out if we're in the state of Colorado, for example, the extremists that we have here of hiking, biking, camping, all the activities that we do, grab a can and you can drink an actual quality product out of a can. Or for those that aren't in the state of Colorado, if you're at a beach, or at the end of the day, if you don't want to open a full bottle of wine, but still enjoy quality wine, the can is the way to go. So really educating people on canned wine can be really great wine.
All right, Chantel, how about you?
I think just to answer one of my favorites, we have a Brett fermented sour that we make in which we switch out the fruits every time that we launch it or release it. The first version that we made of it was with passion fruit, and it was actually fantastic. It's called Vicious Delicious. The one that's coming out most soon is going to be guava and passion fruit, I believe. It's the two fruits mix, and every time that we do it, it's just a different fruit. We've done mandarin, we've done mango, and it has like the perfect tartness and the perfect level of fruit. So that's usually my go-to if it's on tap.
Thank you. Question for Mallory. What was the most shocking thing you discovered in your research?
It was probably just how much there was. I sold this book on proposal. So when I was making an outline from my editor, it just was sort of me pulling things out of the air. And I really didn't know what was in store. And I ended up having to add a chapter because there was so much history. I had to add the entire prehistory chapter was not in my original outline, but I was very floored to discover how much history there was before there was history. You know, women, the first ever depiction of anybody drinking that we know about was a woman. You know, women invented beer. There's just so much stuff there. I was now it's one of those what has been seen cannot be unseen. Now that I've written this book, I'm stunned that this stuff wasn't in the rest of the history books, because it's not just like women's history, it's history in general, and I feel like everybody should know about it.
Chantel, a couple of questions in the beer category. What are German malt and hops, and is it hard to make a good gluten-free beer?
I can't speak to the gluten-free beers. That's not in our specialty per se. I know a couple of breweries in town that do gluten-reduced or completely gluten-free beer, like Holiday Brewing is gluten-free. And Cult to Arms has several gluten-reduced beers. But in our brew house, all of ours are not gluten-free. In regards to German malt and hop, specifically for that Lila beer, we use like Weyermann's, Barca, Pils, and Vienna malt, and Hellertal German hops. So that's specifically to that beer, Lila, that I was speaking about earlier.
Thank you. And let's just get this one last question in. This is a good one. What are your thoughts about the rising non-alcoholic beverage, gummy, whatever scene? I don't think it's anything that's going to chase alcoholic drinks away. I just see it as maybe another category. Let's start with Mallory on this one.
Well, I mean, it's sort of antithetical to my book, but I mean, I think it's great. You know, I think low ABV and no ABV is definitely the buzzy thing right now. Especially, I feel like there was a lot of disingenuous panic about people drinking during the pandemic, especially women drinking during the pandemic. So whether or not the panic was justified, I think there's a big move now that things are opening up a little bit to be a little healthier, to try things that are a little more low calorie, more lower ABVs. But I think it's great if it gets more people interested into this community. I think it's fantastic. I think it's never a bad thing to have more options, to be able to welcome more people into a space.
What's your thought on that, Nikki?
So yeah, I agree with Mallory. I think introducing people to the history and the culture of each of our industries is really important. As we've seen with the wine industry right now, one of the big buzz kind of wines that are coming out there are piquettes, which are naturally fermented, low alcohol wines. They're typically around 3 to 4% alcohol. And we now, as a result, offer that in our tap room for people who don't want to have a 14% glass of wine. And we've also offered we have a kombucha on tap that we can kind of, for better terms, water down with a glass of wine and make it a sparkling glass of wine with adding a little bit of kombucha to it. So I think, like Mallory said, like the more the merrier, and you invite people into your tap rooms and you introduce people to the industry, whether that's high alcohol, low alcohol, and just creating word around who we are and what we're doing is really important to the industry as a whole.
How about you, Don?
You know, because we do spirits, it's not really my world, the NA world, to be honest, but I agree with the others. I think it's important to have a mocktail on our menu, or at least to be able to make one when somebody asks. And I think it's nice that people can socialize and not feel pressure to drink all the time. I think through the pandemic, many of us drank a little too much. So these days, maybe we're pulling back a little bit, but we still want to be in those social spaces, and having that as an option is really nice.
Yeah, and Chantel, I think, probably the same thing with a wide range of ABV. You have a lot to offer people as well.
Yeah, and I agree with the rest of the panelists as far as like, it's not necessarily something that we make per se, but it's something that if we have the option to have available, whatever the case is, because of, diverse group of people that are coming in, and different people may have different reasons for why they may want to go for a low ABV or no ABV, just beer in general. So yeah, I think that part of the reason for the movement too is to just have a welcoming space where everybody can have something.
That's great. Thank you. Well, we're over the top of the hour. Pretty much every one of our attendees has stuck with us to the bitter end here. I just want to remind folks, Jen is going to post the URLs for each of your establishments in the chats. Please go visit Novel Strand, Infinite Monkey Theorem, Rising Sun. Buy lots of copies of Mallory's books, her former book, her current book, and her books to come. You can get her books to come for your little ones, and they won't make them want to drink or anything like that. We're getting close to the end of Women's History Month. We have a few more programs coming up. There's one about breaking the cycle of recidivism with prisoners by working with magic, which sounds super interesting. We have a class on a program on staying soft in a hard world, and also telling your story through guided autobiography. And that's basically like a writing workshop, and that's going to be really great. One last plug, we have a fundraiser at Fiction Beer Company, April 7th for the Library Friends and Foundation of Denver Public Library. And they're brewing up a special blue Radley beer, a blueberry lemon radler. Sounds pretty spring-like, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And they're going to have a library-themed trivia night that night. So last but not least, I want to thank Mallory, Chantel, Nikki, and Don, as well as my co-pilot Jen, for being here tonight. It was really fun. It's kind of like the peak of my vacation, because now I have nothing to worry about for the next 3 or 4 days. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of my panelists sometime in the future in person. And Mallory, one of these days at an ALA or a book expo or something, I hope I get to meet you again in person as well. Thanks for everybody for being here tonight. And we're gonna log out and go have a cocktail. Have a good night, everyone. Ginger ale. Good night.